It was a day like any other. I was busy listening to the boring voice of the dispatcher, waiting for instructions on what to do next. I enjoyed driving for a living, but I hated quiet moments like this one, where I sat and waited for something to come in. Hanging around in the car on a hot day was unpleasant, but it paid off in gasoline costs to keep the van in unnecessary condition. My temperament is such that I always had to be moving or doing something. It must have been hot or hurried because I was sitting with a bunch of regular downtown business visitors. I worked as a courier for a Quicksilver messenger company, and we delivered small items all over the city. Sitting was always an easy way for me to get frustrated. This job taught me a lot of things that I never tolerated. Finally, I received a rush order that called for delivery within an hour, so I went to the address provided to pick it up. After informing the dispatcher that the shipment was already on board, I was instructed to go there and deliver it first. I stopped at a red light on a steep hill heading toward the business center when a goddamn trucker pulling a 28-foot trailer behind his cab slammed into me from behind. His brakes failed. He ended up pushing my backseat into the front seat. At the same time, he dragged me through an intersection. The first responders had to pull me out by holding my jaws. With the help of a board, I was carefully strapped in and transported to the hospital. After 3 X-rays and 1 MRI, they called in a specialist, and by this time I knew it was serious. The medical staff informed me that my wife was on her way. When she showed up after the paperwork was completed, she was escorted inside. I could see the genuine concern on her face. Trying to reassure her, I told her that no matter what, I would heal and get to the point where I would go back. The specialist told us that my neck was broken at such an angle that they were afraid it might have been completely severed. The C3, C4, and C5 bones in the back of my upper neck, which held all my nerves and muscles, were broken at a 45-degree angle. I was given a halo, but because I was in a serious condition, it was believed that I would no longer be able to walk. I was thought to be completely paralyzed from the neck down. After my condition was stabilized near my home, I was transferred to a nursing home to begin the long road to recovery. My wife, with whom I had been with for 4 years, was devastated, as was I. She heard and believed what the specialists believed, but I did not. I clung to the hope that I would walk. It was the only thing that kept me going. Doctors, psychiatrists, specialists, my wife, everyone tried to get me to accept my situation, but I couldn't. I knew I had to play the long game to beat them at their own game. They all thought I was a horse's ass for not taking their advice. I was the most stubborn mule they had ever met. The more they thought they were right about my situation, the more I became convinced they weren't. When they started talking about my life after recovery, I stopped listening to them. To this day, there are 2 things I don't miss about staring at the floor or ceiling for 12 hours a day. My sanity has been saved by talk radio and the roommate I've lived with for the past 6 months. Mr. Stevens was an old man who amused me with his stories about his life. The nursing staff hated talk radio and his old stories. I loved them both and developed a deep respect for the man. He was sick with cancer and didn't have long to live. Since he had already been referred to hospice, we both knew that it was not if, but when, that mattered to him. When I asked about my situation and what was going on, I was told that it would take time to find out why, because I had to heal completely first. Regularly, they touched my feet to determine how I felt. At first, I didn't feel anything, but then the sensation started to return. I found that I could move my toes and knead my feet. This was a secret that my roommate and I decided to keep to ourselves. We both knew that if I showed them, they would chalk it up to something else, not a sign like I thought. At first, my wife would show up after every workday and stay with me until 9 in the evening at the nursing home. But as the year went on, this happened less and less often. I could tell from her behavior that she didn't see herself spending the rest of her life with an invalid, so I decided to move on. After about 9 months of her crap, I finally told her that I no longer needed her sympathy visits. I came to believe that she would wait until I was out of the hospital and out of the public eye to tell me that she wanted to end the marriage. She was still young and wanted to enjoy life. The problem was that she couldn't be honest about it. Not even with herself. My childhood best friend, who never grew up, became my savior because his support was endless. When he wasn't playing in his band, he would always stop by to keep my spirits up. After a few months, because I knew him so well, I could tell from his behavior that he had something going on in his life that he was hiding from me. It was around this time that my wife stopped coming to see him regularly, and I wondered if he seemed to be acting the same way. When friends and distant relatives showed up, I didn't immediately realize that they were all doing the same thing. I knew that something in my life outside the nursing home had changed, but no one had the courage to tell me. I spent a lot of time in silence trying to make sense of it all. With my roommate, who had become close to me, we discussed every possible scenario of what could be going on. One day, my wife, whom I hadn't seen for at least a month, came in and said she was going to Cuba for a 2-week vacation with her married sister Susan, who lived in a town 2 hours away. I accepted that fact without question. It had been almost 18 months since the accident. I had to ask myself why she saw fit to tell me about it. After all, she had long since left me emotionally. I was told by doctors and specialists for weeks more when I asked about my situation. I was tired of their bullshit answers and refusal to help me move on with my life. I was living with the reality that no one wanted to tell me the truth. I wouldn't have thought of it, but while my wife Linda was in Cuba, her sister Susan stopped by to say hello. She was in town to spend time with her mother. I didn't ask her about Linda because I knew she had no idea about anything, or she wouldn't have stopped by. To understand how I felt, you have to know that from the time we became friends until today. My wife Linda, my best friend Simon, and I were friends. During this period, Simon's father stopped by and told me that Simon had also gone to Cuba. That's when I found out what everyone didn't want to tell me. Thanks to the history of our trio, I knew what was going on. My best friend had moved in with my wife. Now they were connected. It was a big secret that everyone was trying to keep from me. Linda was a beautiful woman with blonde hair, a slender figure, and nice breasts. Her singing voice could melt anyone's heart. Many men were attracted to her because she was so attractive. My best friend Simon always wanted her to be his lead singer and thought she would be a great cover for his band. I didn't want to let that happen because I wanted to start building my life, and I was in university studying part-time. I was in my final year when my life changed. I realize now that Simon saw my trauma as a chance to steal my wife by getting her to join his group. I've always been thin. My father used to say I could eat like a horse and not gain weight. At 5 feet 10 inches tall, I wasn't a big man, but I didn't consider myself small either. At the time of the accident, I weighed 150 pounds. My father knew, however, that everything I ate was for muscle strengthening, not physical development. Everyone who looked at me always underestimated my abilities. It was not uncommon for me to carry 2 boxes of typing paper up or down 14 stories on my shoulders. As they left together on their pre-wedding honeymoon, I began to plan my revenge. I knew I would have to plan the long game because everything about me was unknown. A week after my wife returned from Cuba, where she was vacationing with a girl, things started to happen. My good friend Simon came over with the darkest tan I'd ever seen on him. Since it was daytime, I was facing the floor. He sat on the floor talking to me so I could see him. He brought me a box of Cuban cigars, still wrapped in their original packaging, and a box of wooden matches. We talked for about an hour about what he had accomplished during his time here. He said you can start smoking cigars as soon as you get out of this bed. I didn't bother to ask who he went with because I knew. He didn't even ask if my wife had come to see me. If he hadn't been with her, he would have asked. Before he left, I talked him into loosening the belt holding my right side so I could scratch myself. He had to crawl under me to do it. Luckily, he forgot to tell the nurses that he had done this. Now all I had to do was wait for my bed to be turned upright, and I prayed that when the bed was turned over, they wouldn't notice that the belt had loosened. My roommate said after he left that it was very nice of him to bring me Cuban cigars. I replied, yes, it was. I explained that Simon and I had grown up together and were what they call lifelong friends. Looks like this relationship is about to end, my roommate said. As soon as I get out of this bed and on my feet, he should do it, I said. My wife has been his mistress, I believe, for over 6 months. How did you guess? He asked. Did word get to you from the nursing staff talking in the hallway? No, I found out by mistake that both of us went to Cuba at the same time, I said. Knowing the history of the 3 of us, it was easy to figure out. It was after changing shit at 7 p.m. that I started. I was now facing the ceiling. I began to work slowly. When my right arm lost the ability to move, it wasn't long before I released it. I then unbuckled the straps on my right side, then reached up and unbuckled the left side of my upper body. Releasing my upper body, I slowly pulled myself up on my arms until I was in a sitting position. My roommate quietly encouraged me. To this day, I remember him raising his closed fist in encouragement and holding it in that position. I knew it took a lot of strength for him. The weight of the halo seemed a little heavy, but it didn't dominate my body due to my usual upper body strength. My roommate came over with his wheelchair and lowered the side railing. I released my leg section and lowered my legs to the floor. I moved over to the bed until I could reach the dresser. Opening a drawer with his help, I found a pair of blue jeans and a blue denim shirt that I could barely manage to put on myself. I was still in my sandals. The only thing I focused on was the urge to go outside and smoke a cigar. I unwrapped the cigar box and slipped 2 of them and a box of matches into my shirt pocket. My double room partner, an elderly gentleman, had a walker, and I asked him if I could borrow it. He didn't say a word. With a huge smile, he just wheeled it over to me, using his wheelchair to help him. "Elevators to the right," he said. "The nurses' station is on the left. Let me roll myself out to divert the attention of the night nurses. I can hold their attention for a few minutes. Just leave me a couple matches and let me have one of your cigars." "Okay." I smiled and said, "Don't take just one of them. Take 3 or 4 from the box. Just so you know, I'm heading for the exit." I left him 8 wooden matches on the dresser and put my wallet in my back pocket. I waited about 5 minutes to get down to the floor. The first few movements were slow, but I managed to stealthily reach the elevator and enter it. If it hadn't been for my roommate's walker, I wouldn't have made it. My balance was uneven, my legs were stiff and didn't want to move. Still, I persevered and walked forward. A few minutes later, I was standing at the entrance to the building, leaning on my bare feet with my walker in front of me, smoking my first cigar of the year. I had to admit I was enjoying it. This Cuban cigar had never tasted better in my life. When the nurses brought my roommate back to our room, panic set in. I think their feeble brains couldn't understand what I had done. I think what they feared most was what would happen to them because of losing a bedridden patient. I enjoyed the fresh air, the nighttime, and the cigar in complete contentment. I felt free. I was proud, because the very fact that I was standing proved that what I had believed all along had not led me astray. I was right and they were wrong. All I had to do was keep faith in myself and wait for my body to heal itself. It wasn't until much later that I realized how much this ordeal had changed me. I watched with a smile on my face as the police cruiser pulled up with siren and flashing red lights while I relaxed, puffing on my cigar. The cop got out of the car and walked over to me, shaking his head. I didn't even button my shirt, enjoying the cool evening air on my chest. "You made the entire medical staff panic. I guess your health isn't as bad as they said. You know I'm going to have to take you back in," he said. "So put out your cigar and let's go." Leaning against the brick wall, I picked up the walker and said, "Not before I smoke these 2 cigars." When he saw how strong I was, he wised up and backed off. I think he was figuring out how to handle the situation without hurting me more. Moments later, we were joined by the local specialist handling my case and my family doctor. All 3 of them took turns trying unsuccessfully to get me to put out my cigar and go back into the room. I just bluntly told them where to go and how to do it. I went outside to smoke a couple times and didn't move from my spot. Honestly, I had been listening to their brilliant shit for so long that I just didn't care. It was suggested that I contact my wife. Perhaps she could talk some sense into me. Dr. Medill shook his head as if trying to figure out how he could get me to cooperate. At that, the doctor smiled. That spoke volumes to me. Before the policeman spoke into the radio, I said, "Have dispatch call Peter McLaughlin and ask him where his son Simon is playing." He asked me, "Why?" I said, "Because my wife has been his mistress for more than a few months. If I know Simon, he'll keep her close, so she's probably with him." For the first time in my life, I saw the faces of 3 men turn white. It made me think that they all knew or were beginning to realize what a problem I was becoming. My words made them recognize that my wife would be of no use to them. They were back at ground zero again, trying to figure out what to do with me. I knew they were afraid to use physical force on me because of my condition. For once, I was in complete control of the situation, and I wasn't going to let it go to my head. "Doctor?" "Medill, could you call my dad and ask him to come pick me up? Let him know I want to come home," I said. My family doctor and my father were good friends. He replied, "Damn it, Donald, I'll call him just to knock some sense into your stupid head." I grabbed my walker and started making my way to the sidewalk because my father lived only 8 blocks away. A policeman stepped in front of me to block my path. I knew my actions would spur the doctor into action. Now he would realize how determined I was. Dr. Medill said, "Donald, stop! I promise you that I will let you go. You are strong enough, but you are weak. You've already accomplished so much on your own today. I just don't want you to overdo it. We're still coming to terms with you, standing and walking." The doctor called my father and told him to hurry up and go to the nursing home. There was a situation he thought he could help with. "Peter, don't you dare say a word. By your reasoning, he must not walk." "It's his stubbornness and the stubbornness of a mule," said Dr. Medill. "Leave him alone. If he weren't so sagacious, you might be right. Donald is just mean enough to do it out of spite. What we should be concerned about is how the hell he managed to get out of bed on his own." It turned out that Simon wasn't playing at some B-side bar that night, because by the time my father showed up, Linda, my wife, whom I now call only by her first name, was already pulling up to the house, still driving our second car. For her, what she saw couldn't have been real, because she had a look of utter disbelief on her face. For my father, it was a moment filled with pride and joy to see his oldest son standing at full height and proud of himself. For him, it was something that others had led him to believe would never happen again. So I said to him, "As Grandpa always said, hard times don't go away. I may need your help to climb into the passenger side of your truck." Without saying a word, my father smiled and watched me take another puff. I think he was giving himself time to come to terms with what was real and what wasn't. He came up to me and said, "Take your time, son. I'll call your mom to get the bedroom on the first level ready. She'll be at your disposal for as long as you need her. Are you sure you want to leave the hospital?" I cast a glance at him and my father smiled. "Gentlemen, I know that look. He won't give anyone a choice. He'll walk away with or without my help. If he falls, he'll just get up and try again. He's that determined." Linda walked over to him in shock, not knowing what to say, and I just stared at her like she was dead. The policeman stopped her and said, "I hate to tell you that your husband knows about your relationship with Simon McLaughlin. He was the one who asked us to call his father to get in touch with you. Right now, I think you'd better leave." Linda looked at me as I spoke. "Dad looks like one of the Walking Dead came in. What else has Simon been doing besides entertaining my wife? Lived in your house, drove your second car, and used your name to get loans until I got the lawyers involved," he replied. "With Linda's consent, he used your name." I started pushing the walker, moving toward the passenger side of his truck. I paused and, turning to Linda with a stone-calm face, said, "Tell Simon about what you've just seen and thank him personally for what you're both about to face once I'm fully recovered." It was clear from the look of horror on Linda's face that she understood what she was talking about. She knew that Simon's only chance was to run. She knew me well enough to know that when I said something, I meant it. I said, "Linda, tell Simon that his days of making music are coming to an end. He took possession of something I valued with his own hands. So when I'm ready, I'll take it." The policeman should have caught her. Simon's hands were what he did for a living, whatever it was. Dad walked slowly with me as I made my way barefoot to the passenger side of the truck. Once Dad helped me get in, I closed the door. I rolled down the window and asked the doctor to return the walker to my neighbor. "Please let Mr. Stevens know what's going on and let him know I'll be back to see him in a few days," I said. Dr. Medill said he would. Dad, having parked the truck outside the house, came over and helped me down. He held on to me tightly to make sure he could pick me up if I fell. Mom, hearing voices, opened the front door to greet us. We both watched as she covered her mouth with her hand, screaming with joy. Thankfully, they had built a wheelchair ramp in case we needed it. I used the side railing to support myself as I moved toward the front door. My legs screamed for mercy, but I made my way inside. Dr. Medill was right. I had overextended myself a lot. I had made it this far, so I knew I could make it a few more feet. As we sat down at the kitchen table, there was a knock at the door. My father went to answer it, and I pulled up a chair and sat down, exhausted. It was Dr. Medill, and he wanted to examine me. Afterward, he read me the riot act, but he did it with a broad smile. I admit I deserved it, but I would do it again. Handing the keys to my father, Dr. Medill said, "In my trunk are 2 canes I bought for Don for a few days. Go get them while I remove the front of the halo and the chin rest. I think Don has already proven to us that he doesn't need them. The rest should stay until I take another x-ray." Having partially removed the halo, I took the 2 canes and stood up. It was decided that they needed to be adjusted. I asked my father if I could borrow his shaving gear. On receiving it, he put them in the downstairs bathroom. I stood up, leaning on 1 cane, and went to shave. By the time I got outside, I looked like my old self. Now I needed a decent haircut. Mom asked me if I wanted anything. I told her, 1 of your cigarettes, 2 cheese sandwiches, and a beer. She started making me 4. I had to go to the hospital for x-rays and pick up the rest of my stuff from the nursing home. Once the halo was removed, it would send me to a rehab center for a minimum of 2 weeks, depending on my progress. I'm proud of you, Donald, Dr. Medill said. You didn't believe us and didn't give up when others would have. Keep in mind that you must keep seeing the specialist until he tells you not to come anymore, because if you don't, it could severely hurt the insurance payment you are owed. Dad walked Dr. Medill to his car and they talked for a while. Mom watched me eat the sandwiches, trying not to get emotional. It felt good to eat real food again. When Dad came back, he got out a nice scotch and poured us all a drink. When he sat down at the table, we started talking. When I was in hospital, Simon persuaded Linda to start singing in a band. She found that she liked it. As a result, thanks to her, his band started gaining popularity and getting better gigs. This became serious at a time when her visits began to slow down. He moved into my house 6 months after my accident. They built a wheelchair ramp, expecting the worst, preparing for the future when they could bring me home, since I no longer had a home. Dad, I need my textbooks, computer, and personal belongings as soon as possible. I'll contact the university and find out how to start school again, I said. I'll have to go to the bank and see what's left in the accounts if they still have my name on them. Okay, Donald, that's enough. You need to explain everything that happened today, my mom said. I told her about the cigars and everything that happened afterward. She laughed and said, Figura, you're just like your grandfather. When I tell him that, he'll say something like, give that man a trophy. Your daddy is going to take the day off from shopping and get all your stuff from the house, Mom said. But first, I'm going to buy you some clothes at Walmart. Dad walked Mom out, then poured us another drink and said, The policeman heard what you said to Linda. You'll be followed, so be careful. Dad, Linda and Simon will be living in fear for the next little while. It can't help but affect their relationship. I wouldn't be surprised to hear them start blaming each other for the situation they find themselves in. And then just as they start to get back on track, divorce papers will be filed, I said. I'm going to make it as messy and sneaky as possible. Since the car they drive is in my name, I'm going to impound it when they're on the road, leaving them stranded. So you're playing a long game with their lives, my father said. What about the threat on Simon's hands? He'll do that on his own if he gets a little help, I said. Simon is basically an immature adult who is always going after the next shiny thing. If it comes with a skirt, even better. I have a couple friends whose husbands will take care of that once I introduce Simon to their wives. Are you sure about this? My father asked. I looked at him and said, I'm coming, aren't I? If things change, then what I do will change. Rest assured, it's not if, but when. Getting out of bed the next morning was difficult, but I managed. I had to roll off the bed onto the floor and then get up. It was difficult, but I managed. The more I worked my legs and arms, the more they came back. At 10 o'clock, I had to go back to the hospital to get x-rays. While I was being x-rayed, my dad was packing up the rest of my things. Thank goodness my mom had bought me a pair of slip-on shoes. I wouldn't have been able to tie them. Leaning on my cane, I made my way to the kitchen table. We got there just in time for the x-rays because my movements were slow. Once they were done, the head of the department checked them and called the specialist. Once he saw the x-rays, they were allowed to remove the halo from my head. Once it was off, I found that my body movements became easier. I then went to Dr. Medill's office where my mother met me. I was told that I would begin rehab in 2 weeks. We went to the bank to check the status of my bank account. I was receiving an insurance benefit of $2,000 a month in direct deposit. None of that was there. I called a lawyer who sent me a routing number. The bank at that number revealed that all the money had been diverted and transferred to another account at a different bank. The owner of that account was my ex-wife's lover, Simon. It took them half an hour to find an authorization form to divert funds. My signature was forged. The date it was signed, I was able to prove I was in the hospital. By the time I left the branch, I had a new account, all funds restored, and a new debit card. I used it to withdraw $200. I finally got a haircut. The bank called the police to start an investigation. The strength in my legs returned slowly, but I found that I tired easily. My mom took me home so I could rest. My dad was able to get my stuff. They packed everything up for him. All my clothes, books, personal belongings, and computer equipment. They put the computer in his room and put the TV in the family room. After talking to the admissions office, when they found out what had happened, they agreed to let me start the year over at no extra charge. I was sitting on the back patio enjoying the day when the rest of the family showed up. My 2 older sisters and younger brother had to see it to believe it. They all felt guilty for not believing in me and not wanting to visit me more than they did. I forgave them, but realized that our relationship had changed like everything else. It gave me a chance to find out what was going on in their lives. We stayed for about an hour, after which my mother interrupted us because I needed to rest. One afternoon, I asked my mom to drive me to the nursing home because I wanted to see my former roommate. When she dropped me off, I promised to call her when I was ready to go home. When I entered his room, I found him in a wheelchair. "Old friend," I said. "I think we should go out and smoke a couple cigars if you don't mind." A nurse came into the room as I was rolling him out. I tied the laces to my 2 canes and they hung from my shoulder. "Where are you taking Mr. Stevens?" she asked. "Went out for some fresh air, a chat, and a smoke," I said. "Don't worry, I'll bring him back." "He said you were coming back." "We didn't believe him," she said. "The stronger I get, the more I'll be here," I said. "Without his help, I wouldn't be standing on my feet." We went outside and smoked a couple cigars. I brought him back inside because he was starting to get tired. We talked for another hour before he fell asleep. It took me a week to feel about halfway normal. Every day I used my cane less and less often. I hired a feminist lawyer who was furious at what my wife and lover had done. On Friday, when my wife received the summons, a detective from the police department visited me. I explained what I knew about Simon McLaughlin. My father had given him copies of documents from lawyers who were dealing with him because of what he had done. My father and I learned that he was going to be charged with identity theft, bank fraud, and extortion. If he is found guilty, it will mean 5 to 7 years. That evening, I visited Mr. Stevens again and learned that he was rapidly on the mend. I was glad for that because he had passed away while I was by his side. Cancer had finally defeated him, but he fought to the very end. To this day, I wonder if he willed himself to live because he wanted to see me walk again. I arrived on the first day of rehab right on time. The physical therapist assigned by the rehab center turned out to be Simon's younger sister, Colleen. I had to admit to myself that if she wasn't my former friend's sister, I would have been interested. My first impulse was to run away. Fortunately, neither of us had mentioned him. Colleen was a very hot clapper who wasn't willing to put up with any shit. We both walked slowly, probing each other. She'd spent the day testing everything I was capable of. We spent most of the first day stretching the muscles in my body. I have to admit she was surprised at how much I was able to do. I was also surprised at how much my balance had recovered. I had come a long way in 3 weeks. Colleen was pleasantly surprised when she suggested I try doing something else because I asked why. When I realized what she was thinking, I made adjustments if I could. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. "What do you think?" Colleen asked. "That you're ready to start using gravity?" "Strength has never been a problem for me," I explained. "It was the lack of body movement over a long period of time that caused it." "Can you prove it without hurting yourself?" Colin asked. I turned around and looked at her face with a smile. As soon as I put my hands on her hips, I lifted her up. Colleen laughed, then tilted her head toward mine and kissed me. I kissed her back. Colleen had her mother's facial features. She had an hourglass figure, blue eyes that sparkled, a smile that was warm and gentle, a genuine interest in those around her and a warm heart, and a determination that all women of Scottish descent seem to possess. At 5 feet 7 inches tall, she was just the right height to compliment a man like me, for I was 5 feet 10 inches tall. "You've been proven right, Donald Earl Jameson." "Now put me down," said Colin. "Everyone, after hearing about your accident, thought you were finished." My father said not to be surprised when he walks because everyone underestimated what kind of man he is. "Looks like your father was right," I said, sitting her down on the floor. "Too bad another member of your family didn't think of it." "Now that the whole truth is out," Colin said. "The family feels that Simon played a prank on all of us. We had to ask ourselves if he could do what he did to his best friend, what could he do to all of us? We hardly saw him the last 2 years, and now we understand why." "Simon and Linda's day is coming," I said. "They know it, but they don't know when. I'm not the only one after them." Last Friday, Linda was served with a divorce petition on grounds of adultery. Simon, because of what I discovered after I left the hospital, is under investigation. If he is convicted, he will get 7 to 10 years. I often watched you and my brother on the soccer fields. It struck me that although you played better than many, you never intercepted the ball and were very much a team player. Colin said, I've gotten into a bad habit of comparing possible suitors to you. So when do I get my first date? If I was fully back, I'd say tonight, I answered honestly. You and I both know you didn't work too hard tonight, and it still wore me out. Colleen looked at me as if she was learning something about me that she didn't already know. What made you stay positive for so long that you would walk? Everything I did because I believed, I explained. I realized that if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will. Everything the people I loved did was done because they didn't believe. Colleen took my hand and led me to a bench to sit down. My mother's grandfather was a proud man who lived most of his adult life alone. He too went through a situation that changed a lot of things, Colin explains. He and my great-grandmother raised 8 children. With the rest of his family, he was never close. He didn't reckon with their past behavior, but for his family, that closeness is gone forever. I understand where he was then, I said. Sometimes a person does things to protect themselves, but they don't really do any good by hiding it. He may have perceived their deception as avoiding or confronting the truth. This caused him to lose the ability to blindly believe or trust them again. What else has my brother done that our family may not know about? Colin asked. He forged my signature to arrange for a money order to be diverted that was supposed to go towards my maintenance. It was sent from the insurance company responsible for my accident, I explained. He transferred it to another bank to an account in his own name. Colin's face turned white. Then the tears came. I put my arms around her and held her close. The bank refunded my money because we were able to prove that I couldn't come to sign the forms because I was bedbound, I said. When the police detective came to see me, my father showed and provided all the legal documents he had done to counter everything your brother was doing, claiming he had power of attorney to act on my behalf. The fact that the bank got a copy is also a forgery because it was dated and witnessed well after I was bedridden. We talked for a few more minutes while I waited for a hitchhiker. I explained that I would be away on Wednesday because I had a funeral I wanted to attend. My mother noticed that my mood had improved a little, and I had to explain my day to her over dinner. After that, I started my university courses as hard as I could. On Tuesday, when lunch break was announced, I went outside and sat down at a picnic table to have a smoke with the coffee I bought from the vending machine. Later, Colleen joined me with 2 bags she had brought me for lunch. Over lunch, I told her about the friendship I had developed with Mr. Stevens. I told her that we had survived each other through some difficult times. It was a shock to me that there was no one at the funeral but me and my mother. The Salvation Army captain had served well. According to his will, his body was cremated. After the service, I asked the funeral director what would be done with his ashes and was told that the ashes had been turned over to his attorney. As he understood it, everything was done in accordance with his will. We were ready to get into the car, loading the floral arrangements from the funeral, when a man approached us. It turned out to be Mr. Stevens' lawyer. We followed him to his office. Mr. Stevens lost his family years ago and never remarried. As a result, he changed his will, leaving everything to me. His only request is to take his ashes to the highest mountain in the county and throw them away, his lawyer said. He then described in detail what was left for me. My mom and I were surprised at how much it was worth. As we drove home, I told my mom that we wouldn't say anything to anyone until the divorce was finalized. Both my mom and I realized that this inheritance defined the rest of my life. Colleen worked with me every day for 2 weeks. Every little detail about what I could and couldn't do was written down in detail. When I asked her why, she said that what you go through can have long-term consequences. I want everyone to know to what extent. Although we hadn't started dating yet, we were completely honest with each other. Everyone around us could see a serious attraction growing between us. During rehab, I was teased because I was the only one who got lunch every day. Colleen drove me to Mr. Stevens' attorney's office right after she told me that the rehab I needed was over. When I was called in, I asked her to come to his office with me. I asked him if he would like to continue to be my attorney. He agreed, and I asked him to put together a team of counselors for me. He handed me Mr. Stevens' ashes. Where are you going to spread his ashes? He asked. On top of the mountain above where his house used to be, because it overlooks the mighty Mississippi, I said. Even if I have to buy a new 4x4 house to do it. This is a beautiful home with waterfalls on 125 acres of land, he replied as he handed me the keys. You'll need a 4x4 car to drive around some of the lots. I suggest you get the property out as soon as possible from a corporate trust setup in Canada as part of your retained earnings. Set up a board of directors and have them analyze everything before you move forward. Everything that has been done in the last few years has been to manage the corporation, not to develop it. He handed me an envelope containing a check for over $3 million and said, "This is all the cash in his personal accounts and bonds after I prepared and paid his last tax return for the current year. Inheritance taxes have already been paid, and everything has been officially transferred into your name." Colleen then took me to the bank, which was open until 9 o'clock, so I could deposit the money. When I came out, I said, "Do you like Red Lobster for dinner?" At dinner, we talked about my new house and what I was going to do with it. I said I didn't know until I saw it. I asked her if she was free tomorrow after 10 because I wanted her to come with me to see the house. She said yes, but asked why so late. I said I needed to buy a Jeep Cherokee and get it insured since you let me drive. After dinner, we headed to the car dealership. After asking him for a cash discount, we struck a deal on a new silver Cherokee, subject to a commercial vehicle inspection. The sales rep was shocked to see that I was using my debit card for full payment. As we were leaving the car dealership, Colleen asked if all your funds had gone to payment. I replied that it hadn't. "Why did you ask for a commercial vehicle inspection?" Colin asked. "It doesn't make sense for a new vehicle. Anything that's created on an assembly line from parts made all over the world is a crapshoot," I said. "My father, who owned his own store, always did things that way. It saved him a lot of problems in the future." Colleen drove me home. She walked me from the curb and kissed me goodnight. As soon as I got in the car, my mom broke the news to me. My other car had been impounded about an hour ago in St. Louis, while Linda and Simon were getting ready for game night, thanks to a court order my lawyer had gotten. Mom asked me about Colleen, and I explained as honestly as possible how I felt and why. I went to bed with a smile on my face. My dad drove me to pick up the car at 9 in the morning, and it passed the inspection with flying colors. The first thing I did was get the insurance and license plates. At 10 past 10, I pulled up to Peter McLaughlin's house. When I went to the front door to call out to Colleen, Peter opened the door. "Come on in, Don. Colleen's behind," Peter said. "I want to thank you for not holding us responsible for what Simon did." "He made his bed. Let him lie in it," I replied. "The worst is yet to come for him." "Colin told us to let you know we won't be bailing him out," he said. "It's good to see you again, son. You're always welcome here." I think that says a lot about how his whole family felt. Her mom was in the kitchen and started making scones and tea. Of course, I couldn't insult her by saying no, so I spent the next hour chatting with Colleen's parents, with her by my side. Her little sister caught me as I was leaving the bathroom at the end of the hallway and whispered to me, "Mom and Dad think you two will be married within the year." Colleen, though she won't admit it, has been in love with you for years. Her words made me wonder if I was interested in Colleen out of a thirst for revenge. I guess my little sister was wiser than I thought. She said, "Don't, Donnie. You've never been the type to take revenge on those who don't deserve it. As for Simon, we all think he has dishonored the family and we want nothing to do with him." I smiled, nodded my head and said, "Thank you for reminding me what kind of man I am because I had my doubts." "Not all of us," she said with a smile. "Colleen came home when she found out she'd been assigned you as a client because she was afraid of how you'd treat our family. Then she spent the whole evening after the first session telling me about your first kiss after that first day. If you're not ready for a new relationship with her, break it off now before you hurt both yourself and her." "You'll get your questions answered tonight," I replied. Finally, we got out and headed towards my new home. It took us a long time to get there. As we approached the gated community, I got out of the car and opened the door. As we drove up the long paved driveway to the house, we got our first glimpse of the area. Mother Nature had taken over and the house needed cleaning. But when we saw the house, both Colleen and I had a fit of sickness. The log house and its matching adjoining structure were stunning and large. Since it was a corporate event, All utilities were running. Opening the front door, we fell into a dream. Colleen took my hand and said, "It's beautiful, just imagine." He built it a year before his wife and kids died in a car accident, I explained. That's why it's not furnished, but it's well maintained. He lived in the city but traveled out to keep it in order. With his dreams of a house and his family destroyed, it would be too painful for him to live in. We toured the main floor and then went up to the second floor. The master bedroom was huge. The other 3 bedrooms were also bigger than most newer homes. A few things needed updating, but otherwise everything was fine. "When did you find out about your inheritance?" Colleen asked worriedly. "Once Linda is sued, it can't be considered marital property, though I'm sure she'll try to make it so," I said. "It will become my home." "Would you like me to make a list of things you'll need?" Colleen asked. "While you look around the store." After I agreed, Colleen pulled out her laptop and got to work. I found the keys to the huge side building. Stepping outside, I found a huge structure that looked like a garage, with a barn door in the back. Inside was the equipment needed to maintain the land. It took me a half hour to hook up the tractor to the huge brush cutter mounted on the side. I drove down one side of the long driveway, cutting as much as I could, and then came back up the other side. At that moment, I was thanking my grandfather for all the time I had spent with him on the farm growing up. As I pulled up to the house, heading back, Colleen waved for me to stop. She found the safe in the back of the master bedroom, in one of 2 walk-in closets hidden behind a false wall. It was still locked. I rummaged through the bunch of keys and found the right one. I turned the key and the safe door opened. Inside were 3 3-pound bars of gold in an envelope. I estimated the gold was worth about $150,000. In the envelope were bearer bonds of $50,000 each, 30 in all. I knew there were a lot of thoughts going through Colin's head, so I said, "It's a good thing we've been walking together since I started rehab. Otherwise, I might have thought you were after my newfound money." She jumped into my arms. Let's just say it took a while before we stopped kissing. I went back and worked cutting down the thickets until darkness fell. When we had laid out our things and locked the door, we went to supper. "You have a lot of work to do if you want to make it your home," Colin said. "Have you decided where you're going to start?" "First thing we'll do after we eat," I said. "Let your parents know we're going out." Colin said, "If there was a regular seat here, I'd be sitting next to you right now." She called her parents and asked if they had started dinner. When they said they hadn't, we offered to meet them at Yumi's, an all-you-can-eat Chinese restaurant. They agreed and were already waiting for us when we pulled up. Once we were seated at the table, we ordered hot tea and got up to get our first plate. Colleen's mother, Mary, told her, "What's going on? You're so happy." Colleen replied, "It was no big deal. We were just talking, and Donald said it was good that we were dating before he got his inheritance." "Congratulations, it just takes time," Mary replied without hesitation. By the time she caught up with her daughter, she was right next to me. I went for shrimp and peppers, sweet and sour pork, and mussel. Colin got something more traditional. We returned to our seats ahead of her parents and Katie, her sister. It was Katie who asked in front of the family, "You guys aren't breaking up?" "Ever since I started rehab," I said. "Today we finally acknowledged it." A smile a mile wide appeared on Katie's face. "What's that big grin for?" Colleen asked. "No big deal, just remembering a promise made to me earlier that was fulfilled," Katie replied. Pete didn't say a word, just stood up, walked over to the bar at the entrance and bought 4 cans of beer. When he came back, he handed us each one. That surprised us all. We chatted nonstop until Peter and I returned with the second course. "When will you be allowed to start work?" Peter asked. "Or do you already know?" "I've just finished rehab. I'm going to see my family doctor and a specialist next week," I explained. "In the meantime, there's not much I can tell you except that I've been studying for 3 months now for my final year to become a forensic accountant." "When you're ready to work, come to my firm," Mary said. "Partners are always looking for good prospects, and we need someone with your experience." "I'll keep that in mind, but I have a lot of things to keep me busy over the next couple weeks," I said. "I need to set up the apartment I'll be living in with Colleen's help." "You were looking for a place to live today with my sister's help," Kathy said. Not really, it was the house Donald inherited, Colleen said. It's beautiful. Look at the stuff in the gallery. I took a lot of pictures for comparison when we start furnishing it. We are, Peter said. Yes, Dad and I, Colleen said. Donald asked me to help him pick out the furniture and everything he needs for it. I'd rather have a woman's help, I said. Because I know they know how to make it a home, not just a place to live. Colleen looked at me and smiled, then leaned over and kissed me in earnest. While the Colleen family looked at the pictures, I told them that I had inherited the land from my neighbor, and with it the house. Since it's been vacant for a while, I'm going to have it inspected first thing, I said, so I can have time to fix it up before I move in. Did your parents see him? Mary asked. No, today was the first time we saw him, I replied. I still have a lot of work to do to clean up the lot before anyone sees it. Only the ground around the house and garage has been groomed. There's a video of Don on a tractor starting to cut down the thickets, Colin said. That will give you an idea of how bad it is. After dinner, we went to look at household appliances. We went to all the stores and compared prices. In the end, Colleen and I decided that it was better to go with a local supplier, even if it would cost more because of warranty and service problems. By the time I got home, it was about 10 o'clock at night. I was awakened early Sunday morning by the beeping of my cell phone. I had missed 2 phone calls and 3 text messages from my former sister-in-law, Susan. I called her back. Apparently, she had to bring her sister and Simon from St. Louis because they didn't have a car. She wanted to meet me before coming home. I agreed to meet her for breakfast at Hickory's house in Jackson. She was waiting for me right at the entrance, so when I walked in, she stood up and we asked the hostess to escort us to our table. You're looking very well, Donald, Susan said. Thank you for meeting me here. I've already heard my sister's story, and now I'd like to hear yours. You know she left the marriage mentally, I said, when I was lying on my back. She was leaning on Simon for support, I heard. He was slowly manipulating her life and my bank account. Linda told me that you told her you didn't need her pity visits and basically abandoned her, Susan said. Before she got involved with Simon. Once I was transferred to the nursing home, Linda came there every day for the first month, and by the 6th month it was down to once a week, I said. During this time, Simon's visited me in the same pattern. By the end of the 9th month, I was lucky enough to see them once a month. Susan's face turned white and she replied, I didn't know that. The next time Linda stopped by for about 10 minutes, she felt uncomfortable being around me, I said. Then I told her I didn't need her sympathetic visits. Since I've been on my feet, I found out that Simon moved into our house 6 months after the accident. Hell, she lied to me about everything, Sue said. She told me you were being an ass about the divorce. I'm sorry to break the bad news, Susan, I said. Simon forged my signature on a recalculation form to steal the advance I was getting from the insurance company. My father had to take him to court so he couldn't use my name to get a loan. It was easy to prove because the form could only be signed at the branch, and I was in a nursing home the day it was signed. Does Linda know about this? Susan asked. I doubt it, I said. Simon could have gotten the information from the mailed bank statements. The local police are investigating the whole thing. If convicted, he could face up to 7 years. Now I understand why you sued, Susan said. Not only were you emotionally abandoned, but you were changed. Now I'm going to have to tell my mom something she doesn't know. Susan, when was the last time you came to see me? I said. I was totally surprised because according to your sister, you were supposed to be with her in Cuba. She actually went with Simon. What is she doing to herself? Susan asked. Since Linda's personality has changed from what we knew, I said. I have to ask if Simon got her hooked on the stuff. I know he's been selling some on the side to provide himself with what he needs. We ate and talked about general things before parting ways. I said I would pay for the ticket. Donald, I'm going to talk to Mom, she said. If she needs to hear what you said directly, she can call you. Yes, I replied. After saying goodbye to Susan, I called the detective who had spoken to me and explained that my car had been taken from me and where it was located. I told him of my concern that Simon was still selling stuff to support his habit, and that he was selling them quite often between games. He said he would get a court warrant to search the car today, If they found any appreciable amount of stuff, he wanted me to turn the car over to Linda through my attorney, giving her ownership of it. I agreed. Colleen and I took a tape measure and went back to the log house to see how much room we had left for the refrigerator and stove, and took measurements to make sure we bought just the right size for the space we needed. We also checked the laundry room to make sure we had enough room for a full-size washer and dryer. We checked out the pantry because I wanted a freezer. From there, we drove back to Jackson and made the local dealers happy. Before we left, we made arrangements for delivery the following Saturday. I called my parents and arranged for them to meet us at Red Lobster for an early dinner. I was driving when my cell phone rang, and Colin answered the call by putting it on speakerphone. It was the detective, confirming what I believed to be the facts. Not only were there stuff in the trunk of the car, but all the basic materials needed to make the stuff. I told him that I would call my lawyer first thing in the morning and make arrangements to transfer ownership of the car. My brothers are doing it, Colin said. If Dad finds out, he'll kill him himself. Dad lost his little brother to it years ago. We won't say a word, I said. The detective didn't say what kind of stuff was found. We don't even know for sure if the kitchen equipment belongs to Simon. That's why I'm transferring ownership of the appliances to my ex-wife. It will take the detective a while to figure out what's what. My parents were surprised but happy to see Colleen with me. At dinner, Colleen showed my parents pictures of my house. Is this part of the corporation you inherited? My mom asked. Yes, but it's set up in a living trust that was transferred into my name, I said. It's been registered, so it pays a lot less taxes. I have a lot of work to do on this house before it's livable. For starters, I'll do an inspection before I do anything. I think you both should know, Colin told my parents. My brother has a lot more problems than you think. If what we found out today is true, my parents will cut him out of their lives. On top of everything else, I added. Linda's sister Susan and I had a chat this morning. She wanted to hear my version of what happened. No one in her family seemed to know what had happened. Well, what about you two? My mom asked. So far, things are going their way, says Colleen. That's all it can be until what Donald is facing becomes a reality. The feminist lawyer listened to what was going on with the seized car and decided she could play it to her advantage. She called Linda and offered her the car for some concessions. Linda would give up all rights to the insurance payout. I would give her the car and my rights to our house, but she would have to put it in her name. Linda thought she had won and immediately came over to sign the agreement. After paying the debt, Simon drove her to work. I arranged to meet the building inspector at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. By the time I got home, the detective had called to say that Simon had picked him up and they had taken him into custody, following him to an empty warehouse that was suspected of being used as a brothel. He, along with 8 others, was arrested for stuff manufacturing. The building will now have to be demolished. The building inspector found the house and large workshop in good condition. He suggested I replace all the switches with commercial switches with dimmers and replace the lighting with newer models, because in this house, LED lighting would save over $100 a month in electricity costs. The furnace was in perfect condition, as was the air conditioner. After a visit to Dr. Medill, who cleared me to move on with my life, I waited for Colleen to come home from work. When I entered the house just before closing time, she threw herself into my arms, crying. She had been told everything. Linda called her father and informed him. It was a sad and sobering night at her parents' house. I was at the Quicksilver Messenger Company office early Tuesday morning. Everyone was happy to see me. I was offered to go back to work, but of course I declined. I received my last paycheck and went downstairs to say goodbye to those I had worked with. Richard was just loading up for his afternoon optical run. We got out of his van to talk. I wanted to make sure his brother was still in charge of who sat with whom in the cell. He was. I handed Stephen an envelope with a bearer bond. There's a man coming into the system in a couple months, I said. His name and picture are attached. When I was lying on my back, he not only stole my wife from me, but he took over my life. I'm still trying to clean up the mess he made. He got caught making stuff. It would be nice if someone would break his arms so he could never play music again. He also considers himself a real ladies' man. I think he needs social correction for his sexual preference. Richard opened the envelope and looked at the bonds before he said, My brother knows a few people who do all sorts of silly things. What you need done can be done without money, as he is owed a favor for it. As for adjusting to his sexual preferences, My brother will make sure he is assigned a suitable roommate. When he's released, he'll be ridden so much that he'll be walking around swinging. I'll give the money to his wife and son, said Richard. It came just when they needed it most, and then they can't be linked to my brother. Business was so tight they were thinking of declaring bankruptcy. I drove back to the Cape with a smile on my face, knowing I had kept my word. Simon's days of playing music were over. I had one left. Now I had to decide what to do about Linda. Whatever I was going to do was going to have to wait until after the divorce. Back at my parents' house, I contacted the electrician and arranged for him to come on Thursday. When Colleen came home from work, I was waiting for her. We spent the evening shopping for the light fixtures we wanted to install in every room of the house. The bathrooms and kitchen needed to have all the pipes removed from the fluorescent. After meeting with the specialist, he said he wanted to see me one more time before he would allow me to return to work and scheduled an appointment for a month later. On Wednesday night, I informed Colleen that the terms of my divorce had been agreed upon when we had already started looking at furniture for the house. Your next wife will likely want to have a say in what you have in the house, Colin said. We may want to focus on what you need, such as the bedroom and kitchen. No, I said. We'll have the whole house done, including all the curtains, so it'll be ready for her to move in. Are you telling me you've already decided who you're going to marry? Colin asked. Does she already know or not? Let me tell you that Miss knows everything, I said with a smile. And erase all doubt. I can't ask you to marry me until I'm divorced. We attracted a lot of unwanted attention because Colleen got emotional. So we started with the big stuff. I could tell by how quickly she picked things out that she was hopeful. We arranged for delivery and installation on Saturday. It was around midnight by the time I dropped it off. When the electrician came, I walked him around the house and showed him what he was taking out and putting in. I was lucky that he was able to finish everything in one long day. Friday, I spent the day cutting down every thicket I could. In the evening, Colleen and I drove to another furniture store to buy more furniture. On Saturday, I was in the middle of cleaning. All the boxes and packages were immediately unwrapped. I let Colleen tell them where and how she wanted them. 3 different deliveries had her on edge. By 6 p.m., it was starting to look like home. The problem was that we were both exhausted. Sitting in the half-finished living room and discussing progress, we fell asleep. We didn't wake up until 7 in the morning. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It matters what others believe because of the visibility you create, and that creates problems. Colin and I were screwed on both sides of the family we spent the night with together. When we saw them, it wasn't about what happened. It was about when we were going to make our situation an honest relationship. What our parents felt can't be explained better than when her mother said, "I hope you don't carry a baby when you get married." Yes, we were from a proletarian country where rednecks and hicks still lived. That part of American society where morals and standards of principle still meant something. Hell, we were so backward in the eyes of the world that the words we spoke still meant something. I know that sounds a bit extreme, but it really isn't. It's just that in our world, moral principles and standards used to mean something. However, judging by what the media preaches and explains, this is no longer the rule. Slandering, lying, cheating, or hiding the truth is what has been advocated and accepted. 2 weeks had passed, and the attitudes of both sides of our future family hadn't improved when I told Colleen, "Fuck it, I'm sick of their shit. Let's really upset them." "What's on your mind?" Colleen said Friday night. "We're going to buy a truck," I said. "Because we're going to need it by the end of the weekend. Saturday, we're going to buy towels and linens and everything else to make it a home," I said. "If we are accused of living in sin, we can live in it." "You mean it, don't you?" Colin said with a smile. "Before we do that, I want to get my engagement ring." "The romantic dinner will be afterward." So that's what we did. We picked out the set she wanted and put it on her finger. Then we went and bought a truck that had a box lid on it. We picked it up on Saturday. I met her at Walmart. I took the first 2 carts of dishes, glasses, plates, dishcloths, and towels through the checkout line and loaded them up. Then came back and wheeled out 2 more, with bathroom and bedroom supplies. By the time we were done, I had gone through the register 4 times. Then we went to the country mart to buy mostly meat and other things that our local Walmart didn't have. After unloading and putting things away, Colin called Kathy to find out that her parents were not home. We both went out in our cars to get our personal belongings. I got back before she did. We had to laugh because the next day at lunchtime, we watched on the security monitor as 2 cars pulled up to the gate. Colin said, "We can pretend we're not home. After the way they treated us, they deserve it." Both sides of the family saw our house together for the first time. 2 things took their breath away: the size of the house and the way we furnished it. More importantly, they both came to apologize for their behavior. When Kathy told me I could move in with you, we began to relax. I then announced that I would be appearing before Judge Donald McDonald in divorce court the following Thursday. The parents really felt like horses' asses when Colleen showed them her engagement ring. Linda looked old and tired as we stood before Judge Donald McDonald, who asked both of us if we agreed to the terms of the divorce. Her personal life was a pit. Things were not going well with Simon in custody. After the divorce, she asked me if we could talk. We walked out of the courthouse and talked as I walked to my new truck. "What do you want, Linda?" I asked coldly. "Simon is taking a plea bargain," she said. I had no idea what he was doing behind my back. For making the stuff, scamming the bank, and charging you with possession and distribution, he'll get 10 years. With the possibility of parole in 7. "I really don't care about Linda anymore," I said. "I'm still focused on rebuilding my life." "I'm sorry I didn't believe you," she added. "Every time I came to you, I saw myself trapped in a relationship that had no future. Now I admit I was wrong. I'm selling the house and agreeing to an out-of-state transfer. If there's something you like, call me and I can arrange for you to come and get it." I said nothing, walked over and climbed into my truck. The look on her face spoke for itself. I was still wondering how I was going to pay her back. I didn't know Simon's contacts would take care of it. It was Saturday morning when the police showed up at the gate. Colleen led him into the house. It was the same detective I'd met with my father. He came to inform me that I'm now a widow. Linda was executed by whoever Simon was working with as a result of him ratting out the states. He was buying stuff from a Mexican cartel and gave them a lead for a huge operation in 3 states. It's been 5 years since the accident. It's been 3 years since Colleen and I pronounced vowel letters. Peter approached Simon for the first time and told him that he had come out as gay. His right arm was broken because he wouldn't submit to his roommate's wishes. He soon learned through experience that it was easier to submit than to fight. Every Christmas, I get a card every year from my brother Richard wishing me all the best for the coming year. Our daughter, the joy of our lives, is at the stage where she is just starting to crawl. She is the apple of her eye to all of her grandparents. I have a lifetime annuity because a specialist has declared me 20% disabled. Only my wife and my mother know my real condition. For my parents' last wedding anniversary, Colin and I gave them an envelope. We paid off the mortgage on their house and store. Our daughter Carrie Ann was a godsend to us as a child. She was a real redhead like her mother and grandmother. No one knew that Colleen and I had bought the land where the stuff warehouse had been on the cheap. Now it was a modern apartment, managed by a real estate management firm on my behalf. Sunday, we had both sides of the family over for dinner because we had to break the news that another sibling was on the way. Colleen and I are definitely playing the long game. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, so subscribe to the channel and watch the next videos.